Okay, this time I want to tell something about some old Chris and how to recognize real old Chris. What you see during the ages is not only that in this time, Kamardikan time, a lot of new Chris are being made as an example of an honor of the old Chris's. Unfortunately, a lot of Chris, they made them old. But there are a couple of signs that you can really see of it if it's an old Chris or a new Chris. And not only in recent times, but also in the 19th century, it was a big, how you call it, trend to make very old Chris from Majapahit, Buddha Chris, etc. But they're made in the 19th century. Later on, during the change of the ages, because of Mr. Groneman, also a lot of replica Chris are being made. So they're made, let's say, 1900 until 1940. Also then a lot of already old Chris and antique Chris are being made, but they took the very, very old Chris's from Majapahit as an example. This is a real Majapahit Chris, and let me show you how you can tell that it's real Majapahit Chris. The first thing what you can notice is pendok. Old pendok. Pendok is old. Perangka is old. Mendak is old. Pendok, mendak, the grip is old. And you can see that it's Yogyakarta. This is painted. When it's painted, it means actually that it's coming from the palace. And the color of the paintings tells if you are a king, a prince, a servant, a soldier. You can see on the color what is the function of the person inside of the palace. The pendok out of gold, you can test it, quite simple. What I do, you rub a little bit of the gold, put it on a stone. You put drops on the stone. You've got drops for 90%, 80%, 70%, 60%. And you can see exactly how many percent of gold is inside of the pendok. And you can see that it's made, especially made for the Chris. It fits so beautifully, with also gold on top, that this one is absolutely made for this Chris. When I take the Chris out, you can see that the Chris doesn't have a lot of palmer. That's a sign of Majapahit. Chris from Majapahit don't have a lot of palmer, you see. And the palmer is on top of the blade. Let me explain. Nowadays you see that people like to wash it very much black and white, and you see indeed that the blade is going to be damaged. The Chris is kosong then. When it's kosong, it means that the energy is going to leave the blade. So do not wash them too deep, you know. For me, it's quite simple. This is something coming from my family. And of course, I take a lot of care of those things. But I can understand when you're a collector, it doesn't matter. You don't have something like a blood band with a blood connection with the Chris. You can see that the ganja is going forward. That's another sign of Majapahit, you see. And overall the blade the curves are made so beautifully, you see. How they walk through. 5 look. It's a really nice Chris. Now what you see nowadays, what they do, they have a new Chris and they want to let it look like as if it's an old Chris. And they start grinding. But if you start grinding, it only touches the outside of the Chris, you know. And what you see is that they round this up, put it in a lot of acid so that it looks very, very old. Well, this is a real Majapahit, and they don't look that old because you take care of them. You do not wash them that deep, and the edges are still sharp. It's beautifully, but the palmer comes on the metal because the metal goes away a little bit because of washing with warangan, and what stays is the meteorite. Let's say the palmer itself. It becomes more three-dimensional. But I also worked in the antique business, and I want to show you a trick how you can see if it's grinded. Simply take a magnifier glass. If you take a magnifier glass and you look on the surface, if there is some kind of direction, and let's say the direction goes to one certain side, then it's grinded. And we're talking about a replica Keris. Real old Keris, it's more looking like a spider web. It's going all directions, and not only this part will be rounded, the downside over here, but also this part. Because if metal starts to round up, because of age, it's infecting everything on the blade. Not only the outside, but also things like here, also things like here. Because it's the age that's making the surface of the metal, and not some kind of grinding paper, that's rounding it up. Very old Majapahit. And if you really want to know, use a magnifier glass and see if you can find signs of that as being grinded. So this about Keris Majapahit. Okay, let me show you something else. And this is maybe also a nice example. These are offering Keris, Sajen Keris. And they call them Petut Sajen. Petut Sajen Keris are Keris for luck. You offer for them, and you can find a lot of Keris in the ground, Keris like these. And nice thing is that they are still being made. The first thing what you will notice is that you can see that he is sitting on his bent legs. That's typical Indonesian. We call it jongkok. When you are sitting jongkok, it means that you bend your knees, and that you sit on the back of your feet like this. But if you look at the puppet, first of all, you can see it's old, I just told you in the signs of the metal. And old Keris always have that three-dimensional, that the iron is going away a little bit. I received it from my auntie, but one thing I noticed on the blade, it has been washed, and I don't know if Petut Sajen Keris, if they used to wash them in the old times, But okay, it's done. It's probably something of the last time, and if you look at the Keris, you can see that this is an old one. But Sajen Keris are still being made, and I want to show you a new example of a Sajen Keris. It looks much older as this one, but it's a new one, because even nowadays Empus make Sajen Keris for people, for the luck, to ward off unluck, and it's a very popular type of Keris. Sometimes they call this also Keris Majapahit, That's why I took it. But Majapahit also means old in Indonesia, and they're not really coming from the Majapahit era. Could be. Ayo. Could be, but they're still being made. Now you can see that this is a real old blade, you know. That's what it looks like. Now the kuching is smelling on the... Please. Now, this is a new one. And let me put them next to each other. The first thing that I noticed is that the new one doesn't have the nice details. You see the eyes, they're not that beautifully on place, the nose, you see. The arms, when you turn around, it's clear that they didn't put that much time in creating the puppet than this one. This one is made much more faster, you know, and also, there we go. What I miss is the pijitan here. You see, and overall, it doesn't have that nice look. It looks a little bit like Keris Betok. This one looks a little bit like Betok. Let me show you a really old Betok. And then you can see that it has a little bit the looks of an old Betok Keris. It's a Keris made by Empu Sombro, but then an old Sombro with a pijitan. And you can see that this one has a little bit more the looks of a modern Keris. You see, but this is the old one. Well, if you look at the back, you can see that it's quite rough. It looks really old, this one. It looks really, really old. But this is the real old one. It also had a different color. You see, it has a different color on it. Overall, much more details, much more time. Detail is time. And it doesn't have that old overall look. You see? So again, what a lot of people do, they like the old look, and it's also a trend in Indonesia at this moment. So they like to use assets to make new blades look very old, but you can see it on the details, you can see it on the surface of the metal, that for instance, when the palmer is on the blade and not inside of the blade, you know. And well, you also see the same with some kind of Kerises, that they even reproduce some old signs on the Keris, but you can always see it. You can always see it. Now, if you look at this Keris, and let me tell you some interesting things. The first thing what you see is that it's a painted waranka. You see, this is not real wood. But if you look at the mandak, you see a very high quality mandak. Why did somebody pay so much money for such a beautiful mandak? And a mandak represent the value of the Keris. So what you see with a lot of new Keris, you've got those very cheap mandak. Well, you can see that it's made especially for the blade. It fits so beautifully. You see, it has to be specially made for it. And when you see a Keris with those marks on it, it's mostly a spiritual Keris. So when you've got an outer side pendot like with gold or diamonds on it, you know, the gemstones, then it means that the owner of the Keris is from a high caste could be a high military policeman or even a prince. And when you see things like this, it is mostly a spiritual Keris. Why? It's made to scare negative energy away from the wila, from the blade. Now let me open the Keris. Let me put it close, and then you can see that it's rounded, and not only rounded here but also there. On really old blades you can see that, of course, because of the time it's not perfect anymore, but you don't see those strange big round holes on the blade. And this is the shape of Beto Keris. When you look closely, you can see some dents inside of here. And those Keris are made by Pijet. So Empu Sombro, it's a female Empu. She made very spiritual Kerises. And with Empu Sombro, she meditates, and during the meditation process she gets in some kind of trance, and when she's in that trance, then she can actually build a Keris with her fingers, with her thumb. And the dances, what you see here and here and here, they call it Keris Pijetan. They're actually made because in that trance that she get, she can create a Keris with her fingers. What you still see nowadays is that Empu, when the blade is still red or even white hot, that they touch it with their tongue. So there's always contact from the Empu with the pure blade, not only metal, that they make it with some kind of hammer, but they always use some part of their body. Nowadays it's only touching it with the tongue, but in the old days they made it with the fingers. And this type of Keris, I put the handle out once. That's also maybe interesting. The end of it has a little round part on the pessi, round with a hole inside of it. That's also what you see. Now these Keris are very popular. They're made throughout all the years. And let me show you another one who is also very old, and probably almost 150 years old. Spend a lot of time with the beautiful Valikat sheet, you see, and they made the handle out of the same wood, you see. So they spend a lot of time on creating the details of the Keris. Why do they spend so much money on it? Because it's a holy Keris. But this is not a really old one. And if you check now, this is rounded because of age. But if you check this line over here, the top of the ganja, gonjo, if you're coming from East Java, then you can see that this is quite sharp. So it's impossible for a very old Keris. And if you compare it now, then you can see the difference. This one is also rounded, but also the bottom and the top of the gonjo. And if you check this one, the bottom is rounded, but the top is still sharp, you see? Now you can see the difference between very old Keris Sombro. Well, is this a bad Keris? No, it's not. Not at all. It's also made spiritual. And believe me, it really feels like something strong, you know. They really did create a beautiful Chris. And it's a replica. It's a replica. It's an antique replica, also from 19th century. But you need some eyes to recognize if it's a real old one or if it's a new one. You can also see, oh yeah, here you can see that the surface, because of the age, and here the surface is still quite smooth. It doesn't have that age, but you can see the denseness of the pidget, you know. Now let me tell you something about, I'm sorry, I wanted to put it away. Let me tell you something about the Chris itself. And the shape is almost the same. But in the middle, you can see a chombong. A chombong is a hole in the middle. Some Chris are made especially with a chombong. And it means that you can see that they made the hole inside it. So it's meant to be a real chombong. And if you look at something through the hole, then you can make a wish. That's the legend of the chombong. They also say that when you're looking at a female person through the chombong, then that's going to be your wife. But watch out, you know, when you accidentally look through it and some kind of nanette, old woman is coming, walking by, then you've got a problem. So about the legend of the chombong. You also sometimes see a chombong, and well, do I have a Chris as example? I do have, but which one was it? So you've got a real chombong that is made inside of the Chris. Then you have a chombong because of age. The Chris, let me see, was it probably this one? Because of washing, a lot of washing, you can see that oh yeah, I think this one. Let me see here. Yeah, here we go. Because of age, you can see that the lingam, you see, gets washed out. So this one also has a chombong. So you've got a real created chombong. You've got a chombong that is made out of age. Because of the lot of washing, that's also an old Majapahit Chris, you see. Not that much pamor on it. And because of the quality of the metal, it doesn't have the high quality as the Chris, the first Chris that I showed you. It could be that it is maybe being washed too often. But you can see the chombong in the middle. And I'm sorry, I have to put you back like this because I've got the other Chris in my hand. I'm sorry. And the last thing is when the empu is creating the Chris, just like this. And you can see that he has folded a long piece of metal together. If during the forging it doesn't attach enough over here, then you get a chombong like this. And it is a chombong, but actually it's a mistake during forging. If you see lines like this, you see the lines on the Chris. If you start heating it up very much, then the two parts will flow together, but there's a big chance that the lines are gone. Christmas lines are always very difficult to make, they told me, because every time that you beat on the liquid metal, it starts floating. It starts floating away. So this is actually a chombong because of a little mistake of the empu. I shouldn't call it a mistake, because empu, for me, empus are holy, you know, and it's a very good profession. But you can understand, if the heat is not that high, the two parts of metal doesn't yeah, come to each other, you know, and then you see a chombong like this. So the first type of chombong is the real chombong, made as a chombong. The second one is the chombong made out of age, and if you wash it a lot, then you will see that you get the chombong in the middle. And the third type of chombong is actually a little mistake in forging, and I call it a little mistake. Okay, this about some old Keris. Let me put it back and on place. You know, there's nothing wrong with new Keris. I really like the new Keris and what the Empus do nowadays with the Keris. What I do not like is if they sell Keris that are new and tell them that they are old, or people who made antique Keris. You do not make antique Keris. An antique becomes antique because of age. And I also wanted to show you like the patut sajen that are still being made. So you've got very old one, you've got very new one, because still people buy those Keris and offer for their own luck. And especially the last years, you will see that the tradition of the Keris, especially in Holland, is going through a very popular phase. And unfortunately, when things are getting popular, you will also see that people will try to make money out of it. And we have to watch it. We have to keep the traditions alive, but also keep the real Keris alive, you know, because the popularity of the Keris will go down again if people buy a Keris and they do not bring luck. But if you buy Keris and you do it as a collector, it's no problem at all. Just do it. Let's keep the tradition of the Keris and the kejawen alive. Thank you very much for watching.